Hi, Barb. How are you? Good
I'm
evening to
wonderful.
you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for saying yes to the interview today. I'd like to introduce myself formally. My name is Nicolette. I am the creator for the podcast titled Worthless. Read that again. The juxtaposition of your very soul. Now, I think it's good to give a bit of introduction about yourself to our listeners, and
Mm-hmm.
then we can get right into the conversation of
Mm-hmm.
setting healthy boundaries. Wow.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm gonna go back to 2015. So in 2015, when I was 52 years old, I hit a codependent bottom. And if people don't know what that means, welcome to the club. I didn't either, even though I had been in therapy since I was 15, introduced to self-help around.
15.
Yeah,
That means
yeah.
4 decades.
Yes, yes,
Almost.
basically.
Yeah.
And it wasn't continuous, but it was very close. There was never, I would say, not even a total of 5 years during that time that I was not in recovery. But I got introduced to the whole self-help genre in my early 20s and am extremely well read in that. I did all the workshops and spiritual groups and support groups and like you name it. And the fact that I had never heard of this term before was just mind-blowing to me. And if you'd like, I can go into the details of how that happened.
Yeah.
Okay, I will.
Yes,
Okay.
please.
So what happened was in the fall of 2014, I had volunteered to co-lead a project serving homeless people through my church. And around that same time, this homeless guy named Dan started coming to my church as a parishioner. And he and I became very friendly. And I felt like it was sort of like a sign from God so that I could get to know a homeless person as a human being so that when I'm working on this project, I'm serving and like I feel like they're personified. I'm not serving like the homeless. And
Right.
it was really, really helpful actually to get to know him and hear his perspective and what life was like for him and all that. Well, anyway, 2 to 3 months into our friendship, we had a really big snowstorm here in New Haven, Connecticut. And I invited Dan to stay at my home. And I now know that that is not normal to invite a homeless person to stay at your home. Well, he stayed, of course, and then another time and another time. And within a few weeks, he was practically living with me. And I soon felt trapped in my own home. So he was an admitted alcoholic and addict. I now think looking back that he may have had some kind of personality disorder as well, because this guy messed with my head in a way that I had never experienced. So one day in therapy, I was talking about him and I stopped in the middle of a sentence, Nick. I literally was like, oh my God, do you think I need to go to Al-Anon? And my therapist was like, yes. So if people don't know what Al-Anon is, let me just to stop for a moment and say what that is. So Al-Anon is a 12-step recovery program for the loved ones of alcoholics. So most people, if they've ever heard of anything about 12-step recovery, have heard of Alcoholics Anonymous, which was the very first program. Al-Anon was the very second 12-step program. These were both created in the 30s and 40s in the United States, and now they're worldwide, and there's some 200 and something 12-step fellowships. But in any case, and you may be wondering, why do the loved ones of an alcoholic need a 12-step recovery program? And that is because the things we sort of do naturally that we think are going to help our loved one quit drinking, go to rehab, go to Alcoholics Anonymous, become sober, actually are counterproductive. And they make us to be try to be really controlling of those people. And we basically neglect ourselves and put all of our time and energy and effort on them. And they get resentful and we get resentful. And it just doesn't really work. So I had heard of Al-Anon. Most people that I was a heavy drinker for many years and I've known lots of alcoholics and all that kind of stuff. So I was familiar with Al-Anon. So I don't know what I put into Google, Nick, but whatever I put in Google looking for Al-Anon, the word codependent came up. And I was like, wait a minute, what? What is this word? And I was so flabbergasted by it because, how is it possible? I'm a very introspective person. I've taken just about every personality assessment on the planet. I've done all this personal development stuff. How do I not know this word? And I was just like, okay, what else don't I know? So my therapist said to me, Barb, I think for you, that codependence serves as a unifying concept that pulls together a bunch of things you did know about yourself. You just didn't know they were related. So almost like a syndrome kind of thing. Well, I started going to Codependence Anonymous and very quickly felt a sense of relief. And I was like, whoa. And I think partly it was to know that there was a program, that I had this thing and that people healed from it. And so very soon, very early in that program, I remember saying to someone who may have been Dan, I was like, I think I need to be reparented. But I thought I made that term up. I didn't know that reparenting yourself is a thing that people do. So about 6 weeks into my going to Codependence Anonymous, I went away to go visit some friends, one of whom had been in Alcoholics Anonymous, which we mostly call AA, for like 10 years. And she just raved about how utterly transformed her life was as a result of it. So I was like, you're going to love it. I'm going to a 12-step program too. I'm going to Coda. And she was like, oh, this is great. Let's see if we can find a Coda meeting nearby and we'll go together. I was like, oh my God, that's great. Well, she couldn't find a Coda meeting, but she found an ACA meeting, which I had heard of as ACOA, Adult Children of Alcoholics. Now, it never occurred to me I qualified for that. Never occurred to me, why do adult children of alcoholics need a program? Similar reasons to Al-Anon, but even more so. And her dad's an alcoholic, so I was like, I'll go for you. And I walked in, and in the opening readings of the meetings, one of the things they said was, we reparent ourselves. And wait, what? And then they read the list of the 14 traits of an adult child, which is affectionately called the laundry list. And I was bowled over. So what I learned in that meeting is that the fellowship is actually called Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. I'd never heard the and dysfunctional families part. Now that I qualify for. I don't think, it's not like I walked around going, I'm from a dysfunctional family. I do now, but back then I probably would have been, yeah, that's me. So I don't remember much. My friend tells me I sobbed the whole meeting. I don't remember that, but I bought the literature and I came home to New Haven, Connecticut, started going to an ACA meeting. Very soon after, a women's ACA meeting started in New Haven. Soon after that, I started doing the 12 steps with a small group of women in ACA. Meanwhile, I was still going to this weekly CODA meeting. And that went on for a year. And I was really seeing and feeling and experiencing massive transformation in my life in a way that I never had before in ACA. And CODA was like, it was maybe like a 75% fit, whereas ACA was 100% fit. So after a year, I decided to let go of CODA, and that turned out to be a higher powered moment for me, because one of the women that I was doing the 12 steps with in ACA had started going to Overeaters Anonymous, and had, previous to going to that, she started talking to us about her thinking and behavior around her eating, especially sugar and sweets and stuff. And I was like aghast, but it wasn't aghast at what she was doing. It was that she was talking about it. Cause I was like, oh my God, I think like that. I do like that. Like, I just didn't know that other people.
It's like a reflection of you.
Yeah.
Like she's bringing up things within you.
Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, that's me. So she was trying to sort of like gently get me to go to OA, Overeaters Anonymous. And I'll spare the details, but I went with her. I thought it was going to a weekly support meeting like I had been used to going at ACA, but it was actually a workshop that was 3 hours long with various speakers and stuff. And the first speaker did a presentation on the cycle of addiction as it applies to food. And I was like, I'm a compulsive overeater. I didn't know that that even existed. Never mind that I was that. So I have been in ACA for 9.5 years. I've been in OA for 8.5 years. Like if you're in Alcoholics Anonymous and you don't drink anymore, it's called sober. In OA, it's called abstinent, because everybody's abstinence is different, because not everybody has the same issues with food as everybody else. So I'm down over 100 pounds from my top weight. I don't know what that is in kilograms. I'm not good at that kind of thing, but it's a substantial amount of weight. And I really don't know what my top weight was. So I think of codependence as being my core wound. And so my recovery, like I learned so many tools and tips and tricks and skills and mindset shifts in recovery. I mean, it's just, I could go, I mean, I have 290 episodes of my podcast sharing what I've learned, right? So, and I have more to share. But for me, because my core wound is codependence, learning how to build healthy boundaries in 12-step recovery was a real game changer for me. But before I go into that, I do want to say a little bit more about the ACA program. So ACA is a trauma recovery program where you reparent yourself and you use the 12 steps to recover. So the reason that it's a trauma recovery program is that there's most people, when they hear trauma, they think of what is often called big T trauma, or what I would call blunt trauma, where, you were attacked, you were in a hurricane, some like you were in a war zone or something like that. Whereas little T trauma is sometimes called relational trauma. And it's something that happens over time, typically through neglect and emotional abandonment, sometimes actual physical abandonment. And I think of it as like the drip, drip, drip of emotional invalidation. And so when I got into ACA and I heard people talking about trauma, I was like, I don't think they're talking to me. And I also, when I first started going, the stories I was hearing from people, some of them had been absolutely brutalized. And that was just not my experience. But I knew that I had the traits on that laundry list. And I just didn't know how I got them. When I finally came to understand that trauma can result from the absence of good things happening, I was like, okay. And I later heard that trauma results from unmet needs, which is a different way of saying the absence
Oh,
of
I love
good
that.
things happening. And so for me, I think that like the intergenerational family dysfunction results in trauma. Most people who have unhealthy boundaries have trauma. In fact, most people that have addictions and compulsions also have trauma. It's something that's like in the last 20 years is becoming more and more well known. There's a lot more research on it and that sort of thing. And then where the reparenting comes in, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. If we have time later and it seems of interest, I can go into more detail. But essentially, reparenting can be as simple as you are good and kind to yourself. Because what happens when you grow up in trauma and you have poor boundaries and you're codependent and all that stuff is you tend to rake yourself over the coals and blame yourself for everything. And so just merely stopping that and then like being good and kind to yourself, that's the most basic form of reparenting, but it usually is much more complex than that. So what I mean by that is that we cultivate this whole inner cast of characters. This is based on internal family systems theory, or IFS, which is a modality of therapeutic healing where we recognize that we have different parts, and most people can identify with that. Like you might say, well, a part of me wants to go home and nap, and another part of me wants to go hang out with my friends. Like that's a real thing. There are parts of you. In internal family systems theory, they label them things like firefighter parts and manager parts and exile parts and all that stuff. At ACA, we say we have an inner critical parent. That's the nasty voice. We have an inner child, maybe an inner teenager. And then our job is to cultivate an inner loving parent internally so that when their presence becomes more known, that inner critical parent will sort of back off and then the inner child feels free to express themselves. And I know that for some people, this may sound like craziness, and you can go ahead and think that is the most unbelievably healing stuff. And January of last year, so when I was in the program almost 8 years, is when my real reparenting, I dabbled in reparenting before that. And I really, really got serious about it and started checking in with my inner child consistently. Whereas previously I would only do it when something bad was happening or I was really upset. And it changed everything. And the kind of healing that I've experienced in the last couple of years since I've really, upped my game in terms of my reparenting, the healing has been incredible. I do want to shift and say a little bit about boundaries, and then I'll pause so you can, stop being
I
asked
love it
questions or
because
comment or whatever.
you're a host too. Hi, I'm Nick Nieras, your host of the Your Wordless podcast. Now, if this real raw stories hit home, don't wait. Please follow, like, and subscribe my Spotify and YouTube. For bite-sized inspirational reels, follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. Don't wait. Your transformation starts today. Thank you, and bye for now.
Yeah. So what happened for me, Nick, is that in the first 2 to 3 years in recovery, I learned how to build boundaries through this sort of meandering haphazard path. It's not like people were like, here's a book, let's teach you boundaries. That's not how it worked. It just was one of the many things that happened for me. And once I had healthy boundaries, I was like, this is amazing. Like, wow, my life is so much better. I
I
know
never
who I
thought
am.
saying no can be this liberating.
Yeah. I mean, just really incredible. And so what I started doing then was I started reading about boundaries so that I could retroactively understand what was going on like before and after the boundaries and all that stuff. And as I was doing the reading, I would make these little drawings to sort of like visually depict like what they were talking about because I'm a pretty visual person. Well, those drawings turned into handouts, which turned into a workbook, which is now the backbone of my boundaries coaching program. So what I've developed is an accelerated process for people to learn how to build healthy boundaries in a matter of weeks through a very structured program rather than this meandering haphazard path that I went through. So you don't have to take 2 to 3 years like I did. And it's been really incredible. And to be honest with you, many of my clients within 4, 5, 6 weeks are already making dramatic transformations because once you understand, like understanding is a huge part of it, and then having the ability to follow through on your understanding obviously is the harder part. This is where coaching comes in because you have someone like coaching you on your your specific situations, issues, relationships, what to say and all that kind of stuff. So I will stop there and let you ask me whatever you want to ask me.
Okay, from the conversation, from whatever you explained, I could pick up few things. So there were three things you talk about. You talk about and the one that I'm most intrigued is actually what happened to the guy. What happened to Dan? And then number two, you talked about inner child. Did that resonance with why you developed that codependency with Dan? And number three, the alcoholic. How did it come about? So are they related? Do they have like some common theme, or they're all different? And then I'm gonna ask about boundaries after that.
Okay. So the first question is what happened with Dan? Well,
Yes.
I eventually developed the ability to get him out of my house, but I cannot tell you how exceedingly painful it was. I felt like I was going to die. And this was a man I knew for a matter of months. And so what I now know, looking back, is that was a trauma response that I was having. And it's actually like inflamed my abandonment wound from childhood. And so it wasn't about Dan. It was about childhood, but he was sort of like inflaming it. I don't know how else to say
Right.
that.
He was triggering it.
Triggering it, yes. And it was like I felt this exceedingly strong compulsion to take care of him and be responsible for him. And to relinquish that responsibility made me feel like I was going to die. So I eventually was able to get him out of my house. And then a mutual friend told me he's coming back to your house. So I literally left and went to another town for like 3 days because I knew, Nick, if I'm here, I'm letting him in.
You would let him in.
And yeah, I would let him in. So what happened, I don't know how much longer that, but it was actually, I'm kind of astonished at how quickly I was able to, I would say, have an energetic boundary with him. I don't know how else to explain it, but there was one time, I'm not sure how much longer after that, where I was the deacon on the door at church, and he hadn't been coming as often any longer since this, happened between us. And I was standing at the door, and Dan came up the steps, and he didn't trigger me the way that he always had before. And I said to him, I knew you were going to be here this morning. So in addition to being the deacon on the door, that meant I also read the scripture reading. I was going to be reading the scripture reading during the service. So I had read it ahead of time. And whatever it was, I just was like, Dan's going to be here today. I just know that he's going to be here today. And I could tell by looking at him that he knew that he didn't have the effect on me that he used to. And I never saw him again after that. I later heard, I don't remember how much longer, definitely more than a year, that he somehow made his way to Texas and then eventually that he died. But I don't know any details about that. But that was the most painful thing I have ever been through in my entire life. That emotional pain was just, it was just, so this might help people understand what I'm talking about. In our literature, it talks about that abandonment wound as being a soul wound. Like that is how deep that is. So this is how serious codependence can be. And now I've lost track. Oh, the next question was the inner child. Did I feel like so I've never thought of that before, but it was a while before I made any kind of connection with an inner child, and Dan was gone by then. I don't think so. I don't think there was a connection there. And then I know the third question was about alcoholic, but I don't remember what.
Yeah, but okay, now that you mentioned you expanded on Dan, like, why was that sense of being abandoned amplified with Dan?
So the thing about abandonment is that it's emotional, and it's when you don't have boundaries, you're enmeshed with other people. So it's like you're sort of blended with them, and anybody can fill the gap. And I would say my primary codependent relationships were romantic, but as I got further in recovery, I realized, no, I was codependent with all my friends. I was codependent with my colleagues, and I was codependent with my family too, but it was worst in my romantic relationships. I don't really understand what I do now. I believe that Dan was an angel sent to my life
To
get
heal
me to
this
hit a
part of you.
codependent bottom,
Yeah.
to get me to become a boundaries coach, because I can coach people on this stuff in a way that someone who hasn't been through it is not going to be able to do it. Because I know, because the feelings work is the most difficult part of building healthy boundaries, because the reason that people either don't set boundaries or cave when they set them is because of the feelings, typically of guilt and shame. And they're paralyzed by them. It's debilitating. Like I've mentioned several times, I felt like I was going to die, like internal emergency in my system. I am not exaggerating. And I'm sure there are people listening who understand exactly what I'm talking about. And so the idea is that, when someone else comes along and they fill that gap that you had, it doesn't matter whether you initiate the splitting. So I asked him to leave, but it didn't matter that I initiated it. He was there and then he was gone. Or even thinking of him leaving was super triggering for me. Yeah. And actually, part of it is that my identity was a rescuer and a fixer and a savior. So if he's not here, who am I? If I don't sit right. And so here's the other thing is that I just realized I think I have an alarm for my medication going to go off on my phone, and I want to turn it off so it doesn't. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So the way that this kind of thing typically works is that we believe subconsciously that if the world around me is okay, especially the people, then I will be okay. So if I can fix you, then I will be okay. So if I fail at, quote, fixing him, then I have failed. So
I am worthless.
Yeah, my very identity is lost, and yes, I'm worthless. Yes. I don't think I've ever articulated that like that before. I really appreciate you asking me that question because I think that's super important and really, really helpful for me to be able to say that like that. So it's my identity is I'm a fixer and a helper. Who am I if I don't have someone to fix? And it's like, I'm going to be okay if you're okay. And there's, I heard a phrase early in recovery. I wrote it on a sticky note. To this day, it is on the mirror in my bathroom. And it's something like this. Like it is a myth that if only everything outside of us were okay, we would be okay. And people have probably heard it said, like, it's not what's on the outside, it's what's on the inside that really matters. I mean, this is what we're talking about. So this is why. And so the thing about building boundaries is you must keep the focus on yourself to build boundaries. Well, codependents are focused out there on people, places, and things. What is he doing? What is she doing? What are they doing? What does he need? What does she need? What do they need? What does the organization need? If you're involved in a nonprofit organization or a cause, what does the cause need? So when you're codependent like that, which basically means you're focused outside yourself, all your energy is going in the outward direction. So if that wasn't bad enough, it's all going out. It's going to things you can't control. So the
Control.
drain is endless. It is
And
literally an endless drain of energy. Whereas if you turn that around and you put the focus on yourself, you're actually putting your effort towards something you can actually control. And some people say to me, but I can't control myself. Maybe you can't right now, but you have the capacity to control yourself. You can learn that. You do not have the capacity to control other people, places, and things. You just don't. And you're never going to develop that capacity. But you can learn when you start to put the focus on yourself to be able to control yourself. And so you energize yourself by putting the energy in the direction of something that you can control. And one of my mantras to my clients is keep the focus on yourself. I tell them, this is what I tell them. And this is funny and, dramatic, but I say, here's my top 5 rules for building healthy boundaries. Keep the focus on yourself, 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 keep the focus on yourself. Like that's how important it is. And I started saying that, Nick, to people because the first time that I piloted a group coaching program, I wasn't getting my point across. So I just on the fly just said that like that, and they all laughed, but it was the thing they remembered, right? So I teach a variety of ways to keep the focus on yourself, but you can't build healthy boundaries without keeping the focus on yourself because boundaries are for you and about you. They're not against other people. Some people may feel like they're against them, but they're for, like, my boundaries are for me, not against you.
now those people have some things that they need to work on because truly it is within themselves the reflection of their internal reality.
Right. Well, they're probably enmeshed. So it does feel like it's about them because when you're enmeshed, I don't know if your people are going to be watching this on video or not, but I've got my fingers linked together.
Video.
And so you're becoming unenmeshed. If you think about like in the physical world, if you undo something, there's going to be pain involved in that. We're talking about an emotional enmeshment, but there's going to be pain involved. And sometimes it can be extreme, like the I'm going to die feeling that I had.
Wow. I lost my train of thought. I wanted to ask you something. That was really, really incredible. And then when you said, when I just remembered like, say, "Ooh," and then you felt worthless. And then you said, yes.
Yeah.
And it all came down. Because I felt that too. I never really termed it as being codependent, but it was always about looking outside because I've always had this trait of pleasing others because it is whatever, if they achieve something that'll make me happy. So if they're not doing something that I am really approving of, then I'll feel down, demotivated, and then until I realize that actually it's actually about loving yourself. It all comes
And
down to
yeah. And you know what's interesting, Nick, is that so I always felt like a powerful woman of agency. I really thought I liked myself.
right.
I
It
kind of
was like
felt like
a
I had high
yeah,
self-esteem. But what came clear in recovery, well, the other thing, I didn't trust myself. That I knew. I did know that. But what I didn't realize until recovery was one, I did not love myself. So I may have liked myself, but I didn't love myself. And two, I didn't feel worthy. Because if I look back at all these behaviors I was engaging in, which I haven't even gone into the drugs and the alcohol and all that other kind of stuff, that is not the behavior of a woman who feels worthy. Now, if you had asked me, do I feel like I have self-worth? I would have said yes. No, I didn't. And for me personally, the process that got me to love myself and feel worthy was the boundary building process. Reasons number like 7,562 and 3, why I became a boundaries coach. Because there's so much transformation that happens when you build boundaries, because you're essentially figuring out, who am I? What do I
yeah.
want, like, need, and prefer? What is okay with me and not okay? So we're talking about your very identity. So if you're always saying yes to things that you don't really want to do, if you're acting like things are okay with you when they're not, when people are like, how are you? And you're like, I'm fine, when you're falling apart inside,
Yeah.
that's just, you're lying for one thing. So that's dishonest. And, you don't know who you are. You don't know where you end and other people begin. In other words, you don't know your identity. And boundaries are also about belonging, because if you don't know who you are, you don't know where you belong. I used to be like, oh, I'm a chameleon. I can fit in everywhere. Well, and I thought that was great. No, it's not. Because if you fit in everywhere, you don't fit in anywhere. So what happens with many people like me is that we become overgivers, because we feel like I have to give extra just to be here, to belong, in order, at least I feel like I need to bring extra, like gifts or whatever, do more work than other people
Mm.
to belong. And, another thing that came like I got so much clarity about my past in recovery is that I realized that when I went into my relationships, my issue was always I'm too much, not I'm not enough. But I felt like I was bringing a deficit to the relationship, so I had to do extra. But my deficit was not I'm not enough. It was I'm too much. So you're going to have to do a lot of work to be in a relationship with me. So let me give you some extra goodies to like make up for you having to
It's
do all
like
that work.
it's a paradox, right? You feel like you're too much because you're well read. You feel like you're well, you're covered in those areas, but then and then you attract that person into your life, and you tend to attract people that are, I don't want to say, it's like you're settling now that
Absolutely, absolutely. But you are settling, but you don't know it because you don't know any different. So
correct.
I thought my pattern. So I happen to date men. So I thought my pattern with all the men I dated was that they're emotionally unavailable, and that's true. That was true. But the
Mhm.
real pattern was the codependence.
Mm.
The real pattern was, and so what I knew that I attracted emotionally unavailable men, but I couldn't see until I got in recovery was
Oh
that
my
I
God,
was
this is
also
so powerful.
attracted
Yeah.
I was attracted to them, right? I didn't see that part. And the other thing that came clear in recovery was that the reason that I attracted emotionally unavailable men and was attracted to them is because I was emotionally unavailable, which makes total
Exactly.
sense. Because what emotionally available man is going to date me when I'm emotionally
With
unavailable?
your
None,
emotional
right?
unavailable. Yeah.
So what I did, so here's another thing that came clear. What I realized after a while in recovery that I had this subconscious thought was this: I'm responsible for all of the good things in all of my relationships. And whoever he was that I was dating at the time was responsible for all the bad things in the relationship. And it's hard for me, like I almost can't even say that without laughing because it sounds ridiculous now. I wasn't aware of this. This was subconscious. I was operating with this assumption, but it was subconscious. So if you think about it, like there's no possible way that one person in a relationship is 100% responsible for all the good things and the other person is 100% responsible for the bad things. So if you're listening to this and you think, oh, but that's my relationship, you need help, because
Mm.
that's just not true. If
Mm-hmm.
you truly believe your partner is responsible for everything, then you need a wake up call because it's just not possible for that to happen.
That comes in. I just when you said that, it reminds me of being. There's some traits of narcissism there. Like because if you
Yeah.
think that you're,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
like
Yes.
you're
I'm all
all
good and
good.
you're all bad. And it's black and
Yeah.
white thinking too,
Uh-huh.
and it's victim mentality too. It's happening
Yeah.
to me, like so that's another thing is when I did my relationship inventory and recovery, I started to see that with every single guy, I was like, well, if he would just fill in the blank, then everything would be okay. And I
See
saw
the
that in
keyword.
every
If he would just,
past,
yeah,
right, right.
yeah.
And so what that is, that's victim mentality. And so what I was basically saying was, I don't have anything to do with the status of the relationship. It's happening at me or to me. And that's not, I'm 50% of it. And here's what's really the kicker, the funny thing, Nick. When I used to have friends, whether they were men or women, talk about their partners and complain about them, I would say to them, you're 50% of the relationship, which means you're 50% responsible for the status of it. So I could say that and see that about other people,
But you
blind
rarely,
to it for
yeah,
myself.
your own, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I
Crazy.
am it is so relatable for me as well. Oh my God, Barb, this is such an enriching conversation. I love it.
Good, good. Yeah. We've gotten into some deep stuff that I haven't necessarily articulated before. So I'm glad. That's a good interview because I do this a lot. I'm on like 6 to 8 podcasts a month.
Whoa, 68
Yeah.
podcasts a month.
Yes. And then there's my podcast too. So yeah, I mean, I
Wow.
talk about this stuff a lot and I'm in recovery and I talk about it a lot. So this is, you're asking some really like juicy, good, fruitful questions.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're gonna take it down a notch. Can you discuss overcoming guilt when saying no?
Yeah. Yeah.
Becoming a podcast host was a natural extension of my second act. And after spending 15 years in the corporate world, I've transitioned to helping individuals overcome challenges like navigating tough relationships, career burnout, and aligning their mission with their soul's calling. By certifying as an RTT hypnotherapist and a lifestyle coach, I've made it my mission to empower people to recreate the life they deserve and building a supportive community through my podcast. Now, let me ask, are you facing challenges like struggling to reprogram your mind to attract wealth, weight issues that feel like a constant yo-yo, insomnia or restless nights from daily worries, or just a lack of confidence in public speaking? If the answer is yes, visit www.thenicknearestholisticlifestyle.com and grab a free hypnosis audio of these common struggles. It's a sneak peek into how my coaching works. Are you feeling shy? Don't be, because I'm as real as it gets. Let's connect on Instagram and LinkedIn and start your transformation today.
So it doesn't happen overnight. It's kind of a long game. But
Mhm.
by starting to keep the focus on yourself and what matters to you is really where it's going to start. So what I do with my clients, Nick, is I take them through an exercise where they determine their top 5 values because it was after I had healthy boundaries and people were like, well, how did you know what your boundaries were? Like where the limits were? And I was like, good question. I go, oh, by what was important to me or what matters to me. So I wish I had known that from the beginning. So that's why I start my clients with, let's figure out what matters to you so that you can start setting boundaries in such a way that they promote and support and uphold your values. So the more that you do that, the less guilt and shame you're going to have because you know that you're doing it for your
For you.
benefit, not against someone else. And the more you set boundaries, the better you feel about yourself because you show up for yourself in a way that you never have before. And you also get to know yourself because you have to experiment. Like you're like, do I like this or do I not like this? Because you don't, like I was saying yes to things all the time, not really thinking about whether I like it. I mean, I didn't say yes to everything. But I said yes to a lot of things. I think of it like there was a lot of Barb that was up for negotiation. And that's not the case
That's a
anymore,
good
right?
one.
Right.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
one.
So like the boundaries of Barb are clear now,
Mhm.
whereas before it was like where does Barb end and, I begin and that sort of thing. So the way to overcome the guilt and shame is to focus on, first of all, figure out what matters to you. What I start with top 5 values, and then also start doing more things that you like and enjoy and that give you energy, and doing less things that you don't like
That
and that
drains
drain
you.
you. That's called boundaries. So like you set boundaries around those things. And as you start and you give those things to yourself, it's like you get shored up. And what eventually happens, the way I think of it, the language I use is I'm situated in me now. I'm situated in me and in my body and in my life. Whereas I was fragmented and partially in other people. I wasn't situated in here at all, and so it's not something, the guilt does not go away overnight. It's something that, it takes some time. Having people in your corner is really helpful. So when I was building boundaries in 12-step recovery, I was in a step group with 3 other women. The 4 of us, together did the 12 steps. And so we had each other's backs. And so they sometimes literally held my hand, but mostly metaphorically held my hand. And they would say things like, keep your hands away from the keyboard. Do not respond to that email. Or you deserve to set this boundary, or you're not a bad person for doing this, or like, he's your ex-boyfriend, Barb. You don't owe him anything. You don't have to talk to him, like stuff like that. And I don't think I understood for a couple years just how valuable having them as my companions are. This is one reason why having a boundaries coach can be super helpful, because you have a person that's dedicated specifically to you.
It's sounding board.
And I think, right, well, not just a sounding board, but they like shore you up. They're behind you, and they're helping you with like what to say and when to say it and where to say it, and checking in with you before and after you set the boundary, and helping you process your difficult emotions and affirming you and all that kind of stuff. So it's almost like, like I prop up my clients to a certain degree to give them the confidence and the assurance and the reassurance that, they can do this and that I'm with you. And another reason why it's really helpful to have people that are on your side, whether it's a boundaries coach like me or people in a step group or something like that, is that most of us with unhealthy boundaries grew up in family dysfunction. And so we were either enmeshed or abandoned or both, which is most of us. That was me. So when we go to set boundaries, it's pretty clear this is the opposite of enmeshment. It's not that, but it sort of feels like abandonment, because we don't know anything other than abandonment. We don't know what healthy separation is. We know abandonment and enmeshment. So when you go to set a boundary with someone, you can feel like, I'm going to feel abandoned and I'm going to abandon them, and I feel guilty about that. Whereas if you have these, supportive other people with you, that somebody knows what I'm doing, they know what I'm going through, they're supporting me, I'm not abandoned, and it makes it easier to be able to go through with it. So yes, it's possible. I mean, I'm living proof that I don't have guilt or shame around setting boundaries anymore. I just don't, and I mean, there might be a teeny tiny little trickle every once in a while, whereas it used to be like a waterfall of like just a flood of just horrendous guilt and shame, inner chemicals just flooding my body. And I just don't have that anymore. And it comes in time.
Wow. Okay. I'm well aware of the time. It's 44 minutes right now. And and I'm interested, Barb. So when I was reading your profile, you said you're finally in one of the healthiest.
Yes, my first and only healthy relationship.
I want to know about that.
Yes, everybody does. Yes. So a couple weeks ago we celebrated our 6-year anniversary.
Congratulations.
I've literally had dozens of relationships. Some of them I just dated a handful of times, and then I've had men that I've lived with, so every like level of seriousness. And I attribute my ability to be in this relationship to my healthy boundaries. And I will say one of the things that attracted me the most to him in the beginning was that he had healthy boundaries.
Healthy boundaries, right?
And so he was married previously, once for 10 years and once for 25 years. He also was in recovery when I met him, so he had radically changed. So we both know the difference between what we've had in the past and what we have now. So we're super grateful about it. But when I say that it's my healthy boundaries, what I mean primarily is that for both of us, when something bothers us, we bring it up as soon as we
Immediate.
realize it bothers us. And we don't blame the other person. We also mind our own business. This is one of the ways to learn to keep the focus on yourself. So I can see now, I mean, there's so much about my behavior in relationships that has become crystal clear to me in the context of this relationship, because I'll be having an interaction with him and at the same time observing myself and going like, oh my God, this would have been so different in my previous relationships.
Right? That
So
would have been
one,
Barb 1.0. Barb
yes,
1.0 would have
yes.
acted
Barb
differently.
1.0
Yeah.
was lobbing bombs into the
Yes.
relationship and blaming the other person, right? So one of the things that is really clear to me is that whether I lived with the guy or not, I felt like what was going on in his home was my business. Like if I didn't like the way he did something or had something, I would be all in that. And I don't like, my sweetheart is a wonderful, amazing, adorable, lovable man. And he is also a very weird person. So let me give you an example. On the silverware drawer in his kitchen, he has a painting hanging on the handle of the silverware drawer. Like the first time I walked in, I go, what's with the painting? He goes, don't you love it? I'm like, no. Why do you have a painting hanging on the silverware drawer? And he goes, I just think it looks cool. Like if that had happened in previous relationships, I would have hounded him until he changed it. But you know what? It's not my house and it's not my business. And that's one thing. Let's multiply that times 1,000, right?
Oh my God.
It's just
Yeah.
not my business. So I let him be who he is, and he lets me be who I am, unless who he is negatively affecting me, and then I bring it up and we try to have a compromise, and
Wow.
we both do that. And so because we nip things in the bud, like we had a vacation a couple years ago. We went away on vacation and it was the most difficult week of my relationship with him. And we still had a fantastic
because
vacation.
They said there are two things that a person is by traveling with them or living with them.
Yes, yes, yes. And we had traveled together before, and we'd usually travel very well together. But there was a whole bunch of circumstances. We were camping. It was raining. The cabin didn't have the kind
The
of
universe was
amenities
testing
we
you
were
guys.
hoping. Right. And so even though it was the most difficult week of our relationship, we still had a great time. And then after the vacation, like Tuesday, I said to him, I'd like us to set aside about 30 minutes tonight to kind of process what happened on vacation. And if we get to the end of those 30 minutes and we're not done processing, I'd like us to put a pin in it so that we can go and we can come back to it another time so that we can go on with our wonderful evening together. I had never done or said anything like that. I just knew to do it because I have boundaries. So what I'm saying is I put a boundary around the discussion. I alerted him from the beginning. This is not going to be an argument. This is going to be a finite discussion. And I want to get to the yummy, delicious part of the evening where you and I are just a couple of lovers hanging out together. Now, that particular time, we were able to process everything we needed to process in less than 30 minutes. Only one other time have we done that, and we had to put a pin in it and come back to it. But like that kind of thing, I just I didn't know how to act in relationships, never mind I had fights with people previously. I didn't have discussions. I mean, maybe of course I had some discussions, but mostly it was like, let's wait until everything is bottled up and then one of us explodes and then we have a knockdown, drag out, you're this and you're that kind of thing. And that just doesn't happen in this relationship. We both own our stuff and we apologize and, we ask for permission to, give feedback and things like that. And,
I love it, Barb. You're giving me
Yeah.
inspiration right now. I'm very
Good.
inspired.
I'm so glad. Well, I was 55 and he was 60 when we met. So there's some more inspiration. It's like, it's never too late.
Yes, it's never too late. Okay, Barb, what work are you most proud of so far?
Oh my goodness. That is a really good question. I think I'd have to say my boundaries workbook. That was just an enormous accomplishment for me that I pulled together. I mean, I learned a lot from other people, obviously. I mean, I didn't like literally write the book on boundaries. but I pulled together, and I also created some things, and I pulled it together in this methodical pattern. And like I said, it's the backbone of my boundaries coaching program. So because I was able to put the workbook together, I was able to put the other curriculum. So the other curriculum consists of PowerPoint presentations, which is overlaps a lot with the workbook, podcast episodes and articles that I've written that augment it's basically, they go through all that stuff, with some of it with me, some of it on their own. Then they go to the workbook and I call them weekly training exercises. So this is where they start applying all the things they're learning to their life, their situations, their relationships. And it's very structured. And the thing is, people with poor boundaries need structure. I mean, I think most people do well learning in structure, but people with poor boundaries really need structure. So I would say that's the thing I'm the most proud of. And thank you for asking, because nobody's ever asked me that.
You're very welcome. I love your answer too. When you were explaining those things, I was reflecting on myself as well. Wow. Okay. I'm going to go implement all of those things she mentioned.
Yeah.
Okay. What are you working on currently?
I am working on my professional speaking career. So my signature speech is called Stop Overgiving, Repair Your Life from the Inside Out. And I do it both remotely and in person. So if there's anybody out there who needs that, my target really for not just professional speaking, but for coaching is professional women who say yes when they really want to say no, and who neglect themselves because they're so focused on others. So I love to speak to organizations that are either comprised of such women or that serve such women. So that's what I'm really working on right now.
I love it. I love it. And it all ties down to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm like, what I haven't mentioned yet is I was working full time at Yale University when I got into recovery and hit that codependent bottom.
Wow.
So my first 2.5 years of recovery, I was still working at Yale. Then I got laid off, and through a series of serendipitous events, started my own coaching and consulting business, started my podcast. And then a couple years later, decided to make boundaries be my niche, because you have to have a niche as a life coach. And it just made sense for me for so many reasons.
Yeah.
And it's my life's work. I mean, but my podcast and my boundaries work is it's my life's work. It's my calling is what it is.
Yes. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I feel the same way too.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna pivot to a self-worth question, Barb. So I usually choose one question for each of my guests. So in your journey, have you found a connection between spirituality and self-worth? And how do spiritual beliefs or practices influence your sense of self?
Really good question. My gut reaction is no, but I don't see how it's possible that there could not be a connection. So I grew up agnostic, and in my mid-30s, I read the book Conversations with God and came with my own conception of God. And so I felt like a pretty spiritual person. Then when I got into recovery, my spirituality just absolutely magnified. My business is called Higher Power Coaching and Consulting.
Yeah.
Like, clearly very spiritual person. I make conscious contact with my higher power many, many, many times a day in many formats. It could be prayer, meditation, handing things over, asking for guidance, daily readings, journaling. I actually am doing something that's called two-way prayer now in the mornings that my sponsor taught me. And that's been super powerful. And so my higher power is so deeply integrated into my being that I don't think it's possible for my self-worth to not be affected by that. So, but I've never really thought about it like that. And then what was the second part of the question?
How do spiritual beliefs or practices influence your sense of self?
I'm higher powered. I mean,
Exactly.
I am.
I mean, you basically answered the whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I heard somebody say the other day that they might go a few days without praying. And I'm like, what?
No.
Like, what?
I missed church yesterday.
Without praying.
I missed church yesterday. I feel like drained. Like I need to go to the next.
Yeah. For me, I mean, it's not that I don't pray in church. I do, but like 99.9% of my praying is not in church, you know?
I
Yeah.
mean,
It's
before
just, yeah.
even before the interview, you say a little
Yeah.
prayer, a quick one.
Yes.
Yeah, it's ingrained.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, Barbie, what's your heart's greatest wish?
My heart's greatest wish is that women will stop saying yes to things they don't want to do, and they will stop neglecting themselves because they're so focused on other people, which means that the power structures of society will change because they're not going to change if women keep saying yes to stuff they don't want to
Yes,
do and keep neglecting
ex-
themselves because we're drained, right? And I'm
chef's kiss.
all about like the power structures of society need to go.
Out, out, out. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, Barb, if you could create a quote right now for you to leave to the audience listening and the world as your legacy, what would it be?
Keep the focus on yourself.
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Woo! Okay, how can people reach out to you?
Well, if they think they might like to be a client or explore that, they can go to barbchat.net. And that is a link to my calendar to find time for a 30-minute Better Boundaries call with me. It's totally free. Since they're listening to a podcast, they might just hop on over to my podcast, fragmentedtowhole.com. And then my favorite place to hang out on social media is on Instagram. I'm at Higher Power Coaching, and there are links to everything about me in my bio there.
Beautiful.
And they can also go to fragmentedtowhole.com if they want to go onto the web to find my podcast.
Brilliant. And there you have it, everyone. You heard it straight from the source, Barb Nangle. Before we wrap up, I'd like to thank you personally, Barb, for the incredible work you're doing for the world. Despite the challenges, you continue to push forward, paving the way for those that will follow in your footsteps. Your dedication is truly, truly inspiring.
Thank you so much.
And for our listeners, this has been that podcast with that provocative title, You're Worthless. Read that again. The juxtaposition of your very soul. Now, if you've ever found yourself feeling worthless, you're not alone. But more importantly, ask yourself a deeper question. If I'm worthless, then why am I here? The truth is, your soul chose to be here energetically, coming all the way from the ethers. For that reason alone, you are worthy and you are enough.
I love
with
it.
that, this is Barb Nangle, our guest of the day, and I'm Nick Nyaras, your host, signing off. Thank you so much, Barb, for your time.
Thank you. This was delightful. I can't believe an hour's gone by.
No.